century ago, young men and women began leaving their homes and families behind in Eastern Europe to found small farming communes in Palestine. They called them kibbutzim and saw them as a path toward creating a socialist Jewish state. These fledgling kibbutzim became a magnet for other idealistic young Jews looking to create a revolutionary new way of life.
We were 18 years old, very young, very enthusiastic. It was a kind of adventure. We were here alone. We had only each other, no parents, no grown-ups to tell us what to do. We invented our life.
אחרי הכל אני עדיין עומד.
When you live in a kibbutz, you can just go around on your bike and you don't have a key in your pocket and you don't have a wallet in your bag.
יאללה, חמודה, יצאנו.
You just go around like it's your own private yard. And it gives you a sense of freedom you can't get anywhere else. That was something I missed very, very much when I wasn't living here.
ירונת חמודה, את הולכת למרכז?
די, אמא.
ביי חמודה, יום נהדר שיהיה לך.
Most people do not come back to the kibbutz. I did come back out of choice.
נטוליק, בוא, המיטה שלי, אנחנו הולכים לגן.
I have my office here in the kibbutz. I run it just like I would run it outside. I make the decisions, I choose the clients, I name my price. All the money goes through the kibbutz system, not to my pocket. So I get the same like everybody else who did their hours, and it doesn't matter what you do.
I was with the kibbutz for 5 years. Then choose to go back, and not from economic reasons. It's a way of life that we choose to live. There is really need here in the kibbutz, for young people to come with ideas and to follow those ideas. Hey. This is the software company. Actually, I'm selling software to large organizations. When we do well, most of it the kibbutz will get. We'll get as everybody else. If there are going to be any bonuses or stock options or something like that, it goes to the kibbutz.
Many times people ask me, don't you want to have more money for yourself? So I said, no, I have everything I want. I said, and what about your kids? Don't you want to secure the future? Don't you want to give them more? I said, yes, but I won't sleep better if I know that other kids get less because of that. I want all the kids to have more.
זה עוגית?
יש לך חוגית גם?
אתה רוצה עוגית?
I want the kibbutz to stay pretty much the same as it is now. I don't want big changes.
ביי ביי לסבתא.
ביי ביי.
I won't like to live here when it will be just like any other place in Israel.
הולכים לראות טרקטורים במוסך?
אני הבן הראשון של עין שמר. לי יש 5 ילדים. לי אין אף ילד בקיבוץ.
I love the kibbutz, and I don't like to see them going away. I don't like to see them change too much. But time calls for reform in the kibbutzim. Time calls for people to wake up. We have to recreate the kibbutz in order to keep it.
הייתה לחינם.
The very first kibbutz, Degania, was established in 1910 by 12 young pioneers from Eastern Europe.
My parents were two of 12 people that came to Degania nearly 100 years ago. My mother was 16 when she left Russia. She left in a night through the window. She said to me, my father set shiva on me, and I was dead in a family. And she said, but I did what I want because I belong to a group of young people that want to go to Palestine.
Before the First World War, in Russia, Jews were still in the Pale of Settlement. They needed permission to stay even temporarily in a city. They were not allowed at the universities, at governmental offices, at hospitals. It was a despotic, authoritarian regime, and the atmosphere in Russia was that a huge revolution is going to take place. But a minority of the Jewish socialist youth refused to believe that a social revolution will solve also the Jewish problem. And they felt the urge to start a new Jewish society, which will be socialist from the beginning.
Fueled by pogroms in Russia in the early part of the 20th century, the Jewish population in Palestine nearly doubled.
The kibbutz was invented as a solution to a practical problem. There was no work in Palestine. In 1909 and 1910, more pioneers left the country than the number of pioneers that arrived. If they couldn't find bread for themselves or didn't have the hope of raising a family, they left.
Zionist organizations had already begun purchasing tracts of land from Arab landowners for Jewish settlement in Palestine.
Then the Zionist organization came with the idea that instead of working for salary, the pioneers will get land and agricultural instruments as a loan. And when they start to profit, they will return the investment. The traditional Zionist socialists that came from the diaspora, people like Ben-Gurion, opposed the kibbutz movement. Because if the nation will give land to the workers, they will be also estate owners. Even as a cooperative, they will become middle class. He believed it would establish a petit bourgeois mentality, and Zionism must be revolutionary. What persuaded them to agree was simply the realization that if a solution is not found for the maintenance of those pioneers, the country will become void, emptied of this youth, this wonderful youth, that were ready to do a revolution.
The kibbutz movement, like the Zionist movement that molded this country, it was run by kids in the early 20s, even younger, with the ferocity and the dedication of kids. It's a children's crusade.
Right from the start, kibbutzim were radically communal societies based on absolute equality. Nothing was privately owned. Housing, clothing, food, everything belonged to the group.
You know, when I was a member of the kibbutzim, a kibbutznik couldn't get radio as a gift from his parents. Then they started allowing radio as gift. But the radio would belong to the kibbutz and it would move from one apartment to another.
When my parents came for the first time on kibbutz, they were amazed to find out that couples were not encouraged to hold hands when they entered the mess hall. The energy, the libido was supposed to be channeled towards the kibbutz, towards the society, and not toward each other, and of course not toward the family. Hulda was the first kibbutz of the Gordonia movement. The movement is called after A.D. Gordon. Gordon believed that the Jewish mentality was corrupted in the Jewish life in the diaspora, and that the way to set it right is to go back to nature, to work the land. In a way, he created some kind of a religion of labor. And it was part of the ideology to be modest, to be simple. So this is my mother in her 20s. And you can see a young woman who is proud of the way she looks. My mother came from a well-to-do family, but she was a real disciple of the Gordonian ideology. She truly believed that by hard work she would set right all the corruptions of the diaspora.
The most revolutionary aspect of the kibbutz experiment was the decision to raise children collectively.
microphone. The educational system on the kibbutz has to do with the whole notion of creating a new Jew. They wanted us to be the polar opposite of our parents. If the parents were the persecuted, humiliated Jews, we were supposed to be the proud fighter. One of the ways of achieving it was basically to disconnect us from our parents so that they won't be able to contaminate us. My first memories are memories of extreme fear during the night. The children's house was the last building on the premise. Immediately following it, there was the fence of the kibbutz and complete darkness and howling of jackals throughout the night. And you had the feeling that they were right beneath the window. Parents were not allowed to visit. Around 6 there was dinner, and only afterwards we would go to the rooms of our parents. My mother, she would come home only around 7, and at 7:30 she would take me back to the children's house. I think in hindsight that actually it could have been easier for me not to meet her for half an hour, because it just created some kind of a craving. It created the sense that there is something that you are constantly denied.
As European anti-Semitism escalated between the two world wars, Jewish immigration increased dramatically. The need for a Jewish homeland became urgent. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the Zionist organization turned to the kibbutzim to expand the frontiers of Jewish settlement in Palestine. Dozens of new kibbutzim were founded. Clashes with their Arab neighbors intensified.
They prepared the infrastructure for the borders of Israel, for the military force of Israel, for the immigration of survivors of the Holocaust, for Hebrew literature, journalism, for parliamentary life, for everything. We don't know if the state would be established if they didn't exist. It's as simple as that.
Many soldiers in the Palmach, the military force before the state existed, came from and were trained on kibbutzim.
We fought mainly in the Galilee, and then in the road to Jerusalem, then we went to the Negev, so we really fought in all the battles of Israel. 16 of our members were killed, and we decided that when we'll establish our kibbutz, we want to have it on the Galilee as a memorial for them.
On May 14th, 1948, the new government headed by David Ben-Gurion is installed in Tel Aviv. Thus, for the first time since the Roman legion destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70 AD, the Jewish people have a nation of their own.
And now suddenly all this energy burst out. Everyone wanted very much to do something that is important for establishing this new country.
I always wanted to go to a kibbutz. I thought it was the best way to combine Zionism and socialism. That for me were the both things that were very important.
Joining a kibbutz was a continuation of what the Zionist movement had done here before the establishment of the State of Israel.
When we came here, there was no trees here. It was bare, with even not land, even not earth. It was rocky. We brought with trucks earth to cover that something will grow.
I can remember the cold nights. I was freezing, no heating, nothing. Not a tree, not a building, just huts. I knew nothing about work. I was spoiled, and I was not the only one. Most of us were coming out of high school.
לא היה ניסיון בכלום. אני באתי מתל אביב, לא ראיתי פרה על העיניים לפני זה, לא ראיתי תרנגולת. והתחלנו, וניסינו, כל דבר ניסינו.
Now, suddenly, you are measured to see if you can pick the grapes in a terribly hot, sunny day, or you give up and go home. This is what will give you status, not your intellect, not your achievements. Can you do it or not? You had to be very stubborn to be able to stand and not to let go.
Not far from Kibbutz Baram, and established in the same year, is Kibbutz Sasa. They were among a number of kibbutzim founded on land won by Israel during its War of Independence. Sasa was the first all-American kibbutz.
I grew up in Chicago, on the west side. The west side, that was the Jewish neighborhood. When I was a kid, somehow I walked into HaShomer Tzair with a few other boys from the streets. And HaShomer Tzair, the ultimate goal was to come to Israel.
We were fired by the idea of the existence of a Jewish state, and we wanted to be part of building a kibbutz, which would be a life of equality and trust and respect between people. During World War II, all the boys were in the army, and the girls were at the farm in New Jersey, and we got agricultural training. Slowly, the boys came back from the army, and they joined us.
From Cleveland and from Detroit and from California, from Chicago and from New York, they would all get together at the training camp to find out what a kibbutz was like and live the kind of life. And of course, it was far-fetched. It wasn't anything like a kibbutz, but we didn't know at the time.
All of these stories of the Holocaust were coming out. This had a tremendous impact on all of us. With all of the options, why not Palestine? Go and build a country. Do something that is meaningful.
The first day we came here, they came from the newspapers, you know, the baby Americans coming to Israel. It was very cold. We said, this is close to Chicago weather.
We were fascinated by the beauty of the mountains, and we never thought about we might have to make a living here.
We were asked to settle this village which had been abandoned during the War of Independence. This was an Arab village. We had qualms. We had serious qualms about coming to an abandoned village where people's lives had been uprooted. We walked into homes where people had fled. There was a cradle. There was a children's notebook. There were sandals. This was very difficult, but we took it. Oh, this was the first snow.
שהסקי הבאתם עד מארצות הברית.
כן. This is Ima, and she was a student in Boston.
ואמרו שהיא הייתה הבחורה הכי יפה בגרעין.
אני חושב שכן.
The first day we saw the place, it had been all covered with snow, so we didn't see all the rocks underneath.
And so we decided we would get meat cattle we felt we'd be able to make a living with. Sometimes we did, and sometimes we lost money. There was no electricity and no running water and no sanitation and sometimes no food.
We used to go to Tzfat to buy bread and carry the bread home. That's 18 kilometers. And then, of course, sometimes if they got caught in a rainstorm, there was no bread.
For me, the first years here were really the most fascinating thing I had ever done in my life. It was fascinating from a romantic point of view, and from actually the action of the day today. It was different than anything we'd been part of in the past. We were living here in a new country, and it was building a new society.
When the children were born, I had a little difficulty adjusting to the children's house where the kids lived. At one time, I was very upset, and I thought that I might want to leave.
There were some times that for me it was hell. For me it was hell. We lived to a large extent without adult control. Think about Lord of the Flies. Sometimes it was very cruel. I was more sensitive. And if you were a little bit outside of the norm, you were miserable.
I think I don't like my childhood so very much. This kind of sleeping with all the other kids, it was too noisy for me and too physical. I always preferred to crawl, you know, in the night and to sleep with my parents. I still remember the joy of the other kids. I didn't participate in this. I was very individualistic and quiet, and I preferred to read. I wanted to go to the university, and I had to come to the committee of education in the kibbutz and said I wanted to study philosophy. And they said, philosophy? We don't need philosophy. Could you choose something else? And I said, no, I prefer philosophy. And they said, okay, but take sociology also.
I started publishing my poems when I was in high school, and it made me even more lonely. I mean, it was very clear to me that all I wanted to do was to write poetry, so I was very determined to leave.
I felt something suffocating there. I was not strong enough. Kibbutz life invites strong people, assertive enough to retain their individualistic kind of self-understanding, and yet to participate and to care for other people and to live this beautiful life. It's very hard to live beautifully.
It was a very tough existence. But on the other hand, there were wonderful moments. You know, weddings and dancing and the singing around the campfire. It was such an intense experience where your ego completely melted and became part of the ego of the whole group. Since I left the kibbutz, I cannot sing in any other occasion because it looks like a pale echo of the real thing. I cannot dance because, you know, I mean, what is it, you know, in comparison to these intense, almost religious experience? And there was the general feeling that we were unique. We were unique, we were special. We were the choicest fruits of the Israeli society.
Throughout the 1950s and 60s, life on the kibbutzim flourished. But the kibbutz movement, even at its peak, was only about 5% of Israel's population.
I am a happy man because all my life I was living in a communal community. 70 years of happy life is not something small, it's a very big thing.
The dining hall was the center of the kibbutz. Everything that you wanted to know was in the dining hall.
On Kibbutz Holda, agriculture was the main source of revenue, as it was for most other kibbutzim. Much of the farmland in Israel had been cultivated by kibbutzim. New agricultural techniques developed on kibbutzim increased crop yields. and the demand for food was growing.
In 48, after the creation of the state, the Jewish community in Palestine consisted of 600,000 people. And in 4 years, it tripled, with a huge immigration, mainly from Islamic countries. People who were very far away from the kibbutz movement, ideology, mentality, you name it. The kibbutz was something so alien, really as if it comes from the outer space.
When the Jewish immigrants came from the Arab countries, hundreds of thousands of them, Ben-Gurion and other leaders of the country appealed to the kibbutzim to let them in the kibbutzim schools. They agreed to make schools for new immigrants at the margin of the kibbutzim, but not with their children. Not with their children.
As the kibbutzim grew and prospered, many began to borrow money and industrialize.
Ben-Gurion actually exerted tremendous pressure on the kibbutz movement to employ the new immigrants. And many of those new immigrant settlements were around kibbutzim. Instead of opening up and trying to do something about this wave of immigration and find it as a source of invigoration, it became more sectarian, closed itself. And people remember the supercilious attitude of the kibbutzim and the arrogance. And I think the kibbutz lost its power because they didn't know how to handle the new immigrants.
Our troops now occupying Sharm el-Sheikh and the strait is open.
הייתי בחטיבה ששחררה את ירושלים ב-67.
He has got the will to fight, the understanding what for is fighting, the courage to fight, and the training to fight.
The kibbutzim, who played a leading role in 48, also played a leading role in the victory of 67, because the ranks of the elite units in the army, the officer ranks, were full of kibbutznikim.
The 1967 war ended with Israel gaining control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem. The nation's role as occupier of these territories created a seismic shift in Israel's political landscape. In 1977, Menachem Begin and his Likud party came to power, ending the 30-year dominance of the Labor Party, the chief ally of the kibbutz movement.
The major point in the marginalization of the kibbutz in Israeli life was 77. When Begin came to power, it wasn't only a political transformation, it was a whole cultural upheaval.
You had religious forces and Oriental Jews seizing power through democratic processes. They were the majority. It was a rejection of the kind of labor Zionist ideal of what it is to be a Jew.
When you grow up in a kibbutz, it's very much this feeling that you need to find out if there's something else, that what you know all your life, you're very curious about it. You're scared, but you're also very curious. I decided I want to study architecture, which was very interesting and very hard.
For many years, the proof that I am good in the kibbutz was the fact that I could live. If I could make it outside the kibbutz, it means I'm good. If I stay, it's probably because I couldn't go.
We really like the kibbutz, but now is the question, can I find something that's really interesting for life to do here or not? And most of the times it's not. The universe is much more appealing.
פעם ביובל הגיע לביקור, היה חומק בשביל. יושבים עם ההורים על אבטיה, הקיבוץ מביט במכונית.
The slogans of the kibbutz are communality and equality. Now everybody knows that in Israel women have equality in the kibbutz, equality on the army, and things are great. Now both ideas of course are a complete sham. I mean, the army is the most chauvinistic organization on earth, and the kibbutz follow right behind. Kibbutzim are different from each other, like people are different from each other. Bar'am, where I come from, was founded by people who were raised in Israel, not in Europe. When I was about 30, I moved over to this kibbutz where we are now, Ein Shemer. I married a guy from here, and after a long fight, I gave in, and I'm here. I miss Bar'am. I miss it as a different society. They have a more open way of thinking, the way I see it. My mother worked in the kibbutz finance. Then she became the general secretary of the kibbutz movement. The kibbutz was the structure that enabled her to achieve those things. The kibbutz take care of the children, me and my sisters. Takes care of all the housekeeping, food, laundry. But on the other hand, my mother is so alone in her achievements. She's one of very few women who made it.
Women, from the beginning, were asked to do the traditional women jobs, just the same as in the traditional world. And in the end, this was a message that the women gave to the kibbutz. Listen, if this is what I am good at, give me all these things, I will do it for my family.
They said, we don't want to be collective mothers anymore. But unfortunately, instead of saying we don't want to be collective mothers anymore, they said we don't want to be collective mothers anymore. This is the main thing that happened to kibbutzim in the last 20 years. They moved from being a commune to being a community of families, of private families. When you have a very strong family, a family that is a consumption unit, this woman who is in charge of the family turns to her husband and says, well, provider, start providing.
In the early 1980s, Israel's economy suffered from an inflationary spiral that reached 400%.
Kibbutz Hulda suffered from economic crisis, which was really bad. So bad that it was time that actually people started to think about closing down the kibbutz.
A kibbutz is like a Titanic. It is not just a little boat. It is a ship, and it can't move so fast. And most of the kibbutzim break.
I had a lovely childhood. I loved it. I never felt that my home was the specific house where my family, where my parents used to live. My home, the larger meaning of home, was at the kibbutz. That all changed as I grew up. When I was 18, I went into the army, and I started meeting people who had other outlooks on life, even people who thought that the kibbutzim were a bad idea. As I was starting to earn my living, I suddenly saw that it would be much more comfortable if I kept this money to myself and didn't go into the kibbutz lifestyle of, turning in my salary and getting the budget and all that. I mean, I am working in the army for like sometimes 18, 20 hours a day, busting my ass. And this other guy is working like 6 hours a day, sitting around doing nothing, and we're getting the same? No way.
I remember like it was yesterday when I was in the dining hall at Hulda. I think my son Shai was about 7 years old. And all of a sudden, it just sort of hit me that by making the choices that I had made for my reinvention, I was precluding my children from making that choice. They could never live in Hulda the way I had lived in and was able to live in Hulda. They would have to find their Hulda.
My mother is an idealist. You open the dictionary, next to that word, you'll have her picture there. She made Aliyah, moved to Israel. She left a very comfortable lifestyle that she could have had.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was 21 when I first got to the kibbutz. It felt like I had walked into an extended family's home, and I was made to feel immediately as though I were a welcome guest. She became a kibbutznik, really out of a lot of belief in the system and in the ideology. I remember the enormous sense of pride that I felt when I first got calluses on my hands. I mean, I went and showed everybody. My husband was born in the kibbutz. My in-laws were among the founders. And over the course of time, I felt a stronger sense of similarity with the first generation of kibbutz than I did with my peers, because I had made the same choices that they had made. When I look at her life story, I find it tragic. She spent a great part of her adult life investing in that kibbutz and in that community and in that lifestyle, only to find out later that the house of cards around her has fallen apart.
None of the third generation stay in Hulda as a member. None, even one.
The minute that the kibbutzim became poor, all the problems began. If you want to live in a kibbutz, it's the worst scenario, okay? Poor and collective. It's like Russia.
There was an ideological sense that something had shifted. It became something that we weren't proud of anymore. Many of our friends who had been born and raised on kibbutz had left. I remember walking into the dining hall on a Friday night, looking around and seeing nobody that I wanted to sit with. It became lonely.
She left the kibbutz and went to live in the city. 2 years later, she left the country and moved back to the States. It was like something had died for me, like somebody I knew. Part of me had died, and it took me 10 years to work it through, and then we left.
My mother spent her last years in an old age home in a nearby kibbutz, and she understood that the project failed and the utopian dream wasn't materialized. The tragedy occurred when they realized that they lost us. They lost us from both ends. First, because they sacrificed us to the children's houses, and then they lost the kibbutz.
I don't think kibbutz is dead. There is a very serious crisis, but out of this crisis, renewal of old forms in a new context might happen. I live in a kibbutz, and I'm pretty much alive. And Kibbutz Tammuz is a very lively place.
We were looking for a new way of life, and we knew about the urban kibbutzim. I thought this was a way to make a community life, a socialistic life, in a way that can actually work.
קיבוץ תמוז הוקם ב-1987 על ידי 10 אנשים.
אתה רואה?
כן.
We don't own any means of production. We all work for companies and organizations in the big world. We bring home to the kibbutz our salary.
In Tammuz, we have a dining room, but we eat only Shabbat evening together, and we have our holidays together. But I think it's a kibbutz because we share our money. Most of the money is going to pay the mortgages, to pay for education, for health.
We are somewhat like Dgania of the first days of Dgania, much more anarchist. We almost never vote in Tammuz because it's a very rude, crude way of decision making, voting and then killing one option and saving the other. We try to build something much more flexible.
When we came to Tammuz, Tammuz did not have any official tool of doing its community services. A few people here established a nonprofit. Its name is Kehila, and Kehila is doing a lot of implementation of the ideas of Kibbutz Tammuz in the field of community development and education and welfare. It's the second largest nonprofit in Beit Shemesh today.
What we are doing here in Tammuz is Zionism. Unfortunately, Zionism came to be identified with what Mitnachalim are doing on the hills of Shomron. This isn't real Zionism. It never was real Zionism.
The fact that you live in a city can be very meaningful to the way the kibbutz operate. I mean, cities are where most of Israelis live, and they are the place where social change has to be made, if it is to be made at all. The urban kibbutz does not strive to establish a multi-generation settlement where children will grow up and continue the path of their fathers and their mothers.
When I left my kibbutz, my mother said, "You cannot leave the kibbutz. We need you here." And I thought that she was right, but I can't help her with that. I don't want to be dependent on my child. I want them to do good things with their lives. And if it's an urban kibbutz, wow, it's great. But I want them to be free to live their own lives and not my life.
My feet remember the feeling of the bare mountain. Really, it is very physical. It was nothing, and see what it is now. We have all the reason to be very happy. But what's happening around us gives us this feeling that it is not a successful project, what we have done in our life.
I envisaged a socialistic country in all my naivete.
We dreamt about another kind of society. We dreamt about a society that people will care for one another, not in the idealistic way, but there won't be this big difference between poor and rich, between religious and non-religious. We used to be an example. Nowadays we're not an example anymore. People like to laugh at, not to laugh, but to scorn, to whatever bad thing they can say about the kibbutz, they say it.
The Israeli society is telling us the state of Israel is there, it exists. You don't need to conquer the land anymore. You don't need to stand in the frontier for us. We don't need your contribution anymore.
Because of privatization plans designed to bring back its third generation, Kibbutz Hulda, once near collapse, has managed to survive.
When Hulda decided to be a new kibbutz, people from the third generation, like Galia, my niece, decided to come back to Hulda because to be a member now is a different story.
Last summer, we had a baby, and we were invited to this conference in Hulda, where they were presenting this housing project. We applied to the kibbutz to get into this project. We do hope that they'll accept us, and if they will, then we plan to build a home there.
אני שמחה שיהיה לי בית. אני שמחה שאלה תגדל בסביבה שהיא לא עיר.
Nobody is going to be telling me where to work and how to work. What you make is what you have. There is something they call a community tax that goes to making sure that the weaker members of the community don't go hungry.
הידיעה שהיא מסתובבת בסביבה, שיש שם אנשים שהיא יודעת שיכולה לפנות אליהם אם יש לה איזושהי בעיה או מצוקה, אז זה מאוד מרגיע ומשמח.
And if the kibbutz fits my needs and fits my family's needs and can help me to contribute to that community, then that's great. It's a good opportunity. It's like what you would call a win-win situation.
We went through a bad financial crisis, and we cut down on everything, and we came out of it. There was pressure put on to close the dining hall, but people voted it down every single time. We felt the dining hall is really the most basic thing where people see each other and they get together and they're able to talk.
I can live with changes up to a point. There's always a red line, just so long as there is not differential salaries for members, namely that I'm a manager, I get this, and you're working on the line, you get that. Just so long as that does not take place, we are a kibbutz, and I can live with it. Anything else, then don't call yourself a kibbutz.
Recently, Ein Shemer formed a committee for change that would recommend a privatization plan for the kibbutz to vote on. It includes differential salaries.
A few months ago, Kibbutz Ein Shemer asked me to work with them and help them to adopt a privatization model. People afraid of making changes in the kibbutz way of life. They're afraid of privatization. They stick to the old ideology, although the kibbutz way of life changed a lot.
It was very, very hard to find people to be in this צוות שינויים. A few people like me that are not identified with the changes are asked to do this process because no one of these people who we know that want the change was willing to come forward and say, follow me. They just wouldn't do it. It's like giving up on the dream, giving up on the belief that it can be done.
I want for my children to grow in a society that money is not the most important value. You're not more successful if you have more money. You're not a better person if you make more money.
From now on, it's only about time to get to the final thing of disintegrating the kibbutz. If I know it's going to stay like that, fine. So I'm not sure what I'm going to vote.
Does it have to be a happy ending in order to be worth something? It all turned into dust. You know, it had crumbled from me. So did that mean that I'd bet on the wrong horse? And my answer is no. That those 30 years had been very rich and valuable and honorable, and that I had been actually very lucky to be able to be part of it.
I'm sad, strangely enough. Sad first because I have some wonderful memories, and sad because what it says about the human species. The kibbutz system, which was based on altruistic motivation, failed. The American system, which is based on the most rudimentary human instinct, greed and stuff like that, the American system works.
I think the kibbutz movement was the most interesting thing that happened in this country, because human beings lack serious experimentation in human life. And I think this was the most dramatic experiment and the most important one.
For me, the kibbutz is failure in a very limited sense. Essentially, I think it's maybe the best society on earth, and I think it's in the long run it is very much alive.
I think the kibbutz will survive because it appeals to a vital side of the human spirit. There will always be people that want to create a better society, that want to care for other people, that they want to take social responsibilities. And I want those people to be my friends, and I want to be a part of them.
Oh, right.